What got me into encaustic art initially were two things. One, I am schooled and vocationally practice in design and architecture. I've done that for 3.5 decades. I found that my vocational work just did not give me enough creativity. So I wanted to get into something that off hours was giving me more creative expression. About 8 years ago, my youngest boy was killed unexpectedly in an avalanche. And for about 6 months, I was just kind of lost. And then my wife suffered a stroke and paralysis. So I found myself living alone in those hard hours where you're questioning a lot of things. I happened to find a local workshop that was in encaustic, and it was a new art form. I'd only seen a few pieces of encaustic in galleries and museums over the years, but I found it an intriguing medium that had a luminescence when you walked up to paintings, and I realized it was because the light was bouncing off from the background of the board on which it was painted. And the light would come back out through the translucent layers of wax. And in that regard, encaustic is a unique art medium. It also happens to be the oldest art medium in the world. If you look at the cave paintings in Indonesia, which are about 40 to 60,000 years old, France and Spain, which are more like 30 to 20,000 years old. The cave paintings were painted with fire, grease, wax, and some kind of a binder, which in encaustic, the word encaustic, it comes from the Greek word enkaustikos, which means fire or heat. And you use fire and heat to set the wax. And an encaustic painting is about anywhere from 8 to 20 layers, and each layer is sealed with heat. And then you add another layer to the top of that. So it's a very unique art form. And for me, it has also been therapeutic during hours when I needed to keep my head busy with other things. One thing you'll find with encaustic art is it utilizes the left brain as much as the right. Typically in art or the creative process, whether you're writing, doing formulas, there's so many ways that creativity can be expressed, but in art, you typically are using the right brain. And with encaustic, you're using the left brain as much because these paintings have to be engineered in how you're laying the wax down so they will adhere. For example, you don't want to be rubbing oil in before you finish your painting, otherwise the layers won't stick, and so on. And so there's a lot of brain power going on as you're trying to engineer how this painting is going to build up. And encaustic is as much an additive art, where you're adding to the board, as it is an excavative art, where you're digging out or etching in. And painting, etching, and it can be very sculptural too. Whereas with other types of painting, you don't quite have that opportunity. And then of course the luminescence you can do with transparent layers of wax. That's why I like encaustic. Some people would think it's a delicate art form, and I guess to a degree it is, but you use a binder called Damar resin in it, which is flamed, and that is what hardens the wax. And over time, the wax continues to harden. In ancient Egypt, some of the sarcophaguses of the wealthy there, not the pharaohs and the ruling class, but the wealthy class, they would pay artists to paint the face of the deceased on the sarcophagus. And that was always done with beeswax and resin. The art form goes back quite a long ways. And now in America, and actually globally, but mainly in America, materials and tools are now much more readily available, whereas they were not even 4 decades ago. Encaustic was a pretty rare art form. Being brand new in encaustic, what you find is it can be a very frustrating art form. Again, it requires as much left brain as right brain, and you're trying to figure out the physics of it. So sometimes, the wax will run right off the board. You put too much heat on. You are learning how and when to touch it, when to etch it or excavate it, and so on. You also cannot get realism in encaustic like you could with oil or acrylic paint. That is why I chose to go in the vein of abstract or contemporary in terms of my subject matter, which lends itself a little more to that. I've been asked why people buy my artwork and what do they find in it. I got a wonderful phone call the other day from a woman who had bought several pieces. She mentioned the layers and layers of depth that she can go into her room and look at this painting, and every time it intrigues her, it excites her, she finds something new. And I come from the design and architecture world. So often in my pieces, you will find architectural lines, drawings in there, and I always try to hide some things that it takes a little while for somebody to notice in a painting. Art is subjective, and everybody has their style. My style is abstract and contemporary, and I have chosen recently to even get more into very finite hard edge. And that is a hard thing to do. I've been doing this now about 8 years. It's taken a long time to master hard edges. The medium can be soft, you're using fire, it can flow, and sometimes it can be frustrating. But when you start learning the attributes and when to stop or how much heat to apply, you kind of start learning what you can do with the medium. Why I would say owning a piece of encaustic art is a good investment is because it's a very unique art form. You can buy oils and acrylics out there, you can buy them in all styles. Mine is more contemporary and will weather well, but the art form is unique.